Well, we're finally here. Shadow of the Erdtree is out, it slaps, and now it's time to rank the bosses from worst to best. As of right now, I've beaten the DLC 2 times, and while I know my thoughts on the bosses will continue to change as I get more playthroughs under my belt, I still feel pretty confident with my current ranking. Now, obviously, this DLC has tons of fights in it, but what I've decided to count for the list is all of the remembrance bosses, any bosses that stand in your way of completing the DLC, and also just bail, because honestly, why the hell isn't he a remembrance boss? Keep in mind that this list is just my personal opinion. I do consider certain criteria, such as how well made the movesets are, or having cool designs, but at the end of the day, it's just about how much I personally enjoy fighting them. And naturally, full spoilers ahead. If you're watching this, then I assume you either don't care about being spoiled, or have already seen the bosses anyway. So with all that said, let's begin. Number 13, Leda and her allies. Why? Why would you do this, FromSoft? For the most part, this DLC is absolutely stacked with some of the best bosses you've ever concocted. And then we've also got this mandatory NPC gank fight that can potentially be even shittier gameplay-wise than Half-Light from Dark Souls 3. Okay, in all seriousness, I totally get the appeal from a story perspective. It's basically supposed to be a big culmination of the NPCs you've met throughout your journey coming together for one big showdown, which is a really cool concept. Plus, I think the arena and the music are great. Based on which characters you've helped throughout the game, you can have a multitude of different scenarios play out filled with a lot of cool dialogue. And on my second playthrough, I had a pretty fun time with it. But all of this comes with the caveat that you're basically expected to summon allies for the fight. On my first playthrough, I didn't even consider summoning, since that's just personally how I play these games, so even though I was able to consistently defeat Hornsent before the other foes showed up, I still ended up spending an annoying amount of time running away and spamming weapon skills in order to claim victory. While I obviously won't ever hate on other people for using summons, I also don't like the idea of the game expecting you to use them. I think if they just made the characters spawn in a lot slower, then I easily could have brushed it off as a cool little story moment. But they just barely give you any room to breathe, and on top of that, they even had the audacity to give Dane and Leda healing flasks. The way I see it, if you're going to make an NPC fight, then you should just accept from the get-go that it's obviously not going to compare to the actual intricately designed battles, meaning that the main goal is to simply make it inoffensive. But instead, they went out of their way to try and make it challenging, resulting in one of the absolute lowest lows in this expansion in terms of gameplay. I'm glad that there are lots of players out there who really enjoyed this fight, but if you're someone like me whose instinct is not to summon, then it feels like one final reminder from the main game of how badly Elden Ring has handled multi-target fights. Number 12, Golden Hippopotamus. In the grand scheme of things, this fight really isn't anything special, but I've still gotta give it some credit for having a pretty solid moveset. I mean, his mouth grab attack admittedly isn't great and feels a little wonky, plus it's just really frustrating to get hit by. But once you learn how to run past it, I don't think it's very troublesome. In a way, I feel like this fight is a great example of how far FromSoft has come with their boss design. If this hippo was found in Dark Souls 1, then it would undoubtedly be considered one of the most complex and well-made bosses in the game. But in Shadow of the Erdtree, he's basically just a cool little speed bump. The moveset rides a fine line of being somewhat demanding, while also never feeling too aggressive. He tends to give you a plethora of opportunities to find your way behind him and sneak in some damage. In Phase 1, his attacks mostly just consist of chomps and head slams, which are decently satisfying to dodge. Then in Phase 2, he turns himself into a weird golden porcupine where he starts shooting his thorns at you, doing ridiculous flips through the air, and coming at you with some pretty well telegraphed charge attacks, all of which I think are fun to avoid. The only problems I have with this fight are that for some reason there's a bug where you can't land visceral attacks on him, and I think the arena is occasionally a little too small to deal with some of the bigger attacks. If we were just given a bit more space to properly face this big boy, then I think we'd be hearing a lot less people complaining about it. But for what it's worth, I think this is a fairly cool little battle. Number 11, Commander Gaius. So this dude is kind of an odd case where most of the time I think it's a cool and fun fight, but it's just held back due to having one questionable move. And obviously I'm talking about the charge. The timing on that shit is so tight.
Tight!
Once I learned that you're supposed to roll into it instead of to the side, I've been avoiding it way more consistently. But even then, it still feels like a bit of a gamble if it'll actually work, which definitely makes this boss a lot less enjoyable than it could have been. Having to stay on edge because of this one debatably bullshit attack makes the whole thing feel a bit unnecessarily stressful, and I know that it's led a lot of people to start calling this fight terrible. But despite this one flaw being worse than any aspect of the Golden Hippo fight, the reason I still like Gaius more is because he has significantly higher highs. I'm a big fan of all of his attacks that involve gravity magic. The thrusts and projectiles he shoots with his spear have good timing and feel great to avoid. This little move where he throws some rocks at you is nice, and his phase 2 exclusive attacks like the one where he shoots at the ground leaving a big AoE and the mid-air charge are both hella cool and well made. Plus, for the most part, I think the rest of his moveset is also pretty solid. There's a nice variety of attacks from the boar, like head slams or kicks if you get behind it, along with some standard swings from Gaius himself. He's also got this one really long combo involving both of them that requires proper spacing and timing from the player and feels great to avoid. I also find the boss design to be pretty cool. I think Gaius himself and the boar both have some pretty slick armor. So from what I've seen, I know a lot of people would probably like for me to call this fight unfair garbage, but I honestly find it to be good fun as long as he isn't whipping out the charge attack. Number 10, Erdtree Avatar. Yeah, I'm just gonna call it Erdtree because I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce Erdtree. First things first, I love the design of this boss. This is gonna be a very common theme throughout the video, but FromSoft never ceases to impress me with how they're able to consistently cook up such cool and weird looking creatures. In fact, it's gonna get a lot more impressive as we go on, but finding this withered sentient sunflower for the first time really caught me off guard. The arena you fight it in also looks great. It feels so trippy being this close to the Erdtree, and honestly kinda makes me wish we had a fully fledged area more centered around it, but oh well. Moveset wise, I think this fight is pretty smooth and well made. In comparison to the other Remembrance bosses, it does feel a little weirdly easy, and considering how late a lot of people will end up finding it, the health pool definitely could have been bigger. But even if it's not trying to be the most memorable and complex foe in the game, I still have a fun time with it. It has a lot of basic swipes and projectiles it shoots with the roots, which all feel pretty clean. I also like the little projectiles that it can summon over its head. And the charge attack that it gains in the second phase is really cool. The fact that it just goes flying so far and fast is honestly kind of intimidating. But my favorite attack is definitely the big AoE blast it gains in the final phase, which requires some precise timing to avoid. And I also love how it can do multiple at once to throw you off. Of course, I've also got to mention that damaging this boss feels really satisfying. It's kinda like Ebrietas from Bloodborne, where you have the choice to either hit the base of its body or go for its weird ass head for some big damage, and by a certain point, I just started exclusively using headshots. My only real complaint is honestly just the weird way that the phase changes are handled. Obviously, FromSoft isn't new to the idea of hiding a boss's second health bar. They've done it before, and sometimes I'm actually a big fan of how they handle it. But I don't know, the fact that this thing is hiding 2 extra health bars feels a little weird and redundant, especially since it doesn't even come back in a cool or well-explained way. It just disappears and miraculously pops out of the ground again. But aside from that, I think this is a reasonably fun fight, even if it's a little too easy. Number 9, Meter, Mother of Fingers. I should mention that from this point onward, these bosses were incredibly difficult to rank. I spent a lot of time going back and forth with my placements, so just keep in mind that I really like everything from this point on. Meter is one of the most insanely designed bosses FromSoft has ever made. Seeing this thing for the first time was a really memorable moment. And of course, it's fitting as the source of the fingers. Now we know where these guys came from. I think it's great that we're now actually able to see the power of the fingers portrayed through a boss fight. It's not like I ever doubted their importance in the main game. It was made pretty clear what a significant role they play. But seeing this horrifying mass of fingers summoning a black hole and shooting giant purple lasers is so awesome. If I'm being real, the spectacle is definitely my favorite favorite aspect of this fight. It's not like the gameplay is bad or anything, but I feel like this was a boss where FromSoft decided to lean heavily into the visuals while just making a serviceable moveset to go along with it. I also think the arena looks amazing. It's such a cool and trippy location that feels pretty fitting to reach after going through the trouble of blowing the finger horns in the ruins. Metter has a lot of basic attacks such as body slams, trying to land hits with her arms, punishing you from the side with her rows of fingers, as well as some eyeball lasers, all of which work well enough. She also has the ability to spawn some hand enemies on the spot, and while this is honestly a slight nuisance gameplay-wise, I'm okay with it since it just shows her doing what she does. Like, yep, she's able to create new fingers. Makes sense. But of course, the most memorable attacks come from her second phase, like the one where she goofily spins around before falling to the ground, summoning a bunch of little vortexes, and of course creating the giant purple lasers. Honestly, I'm still not sure how you're supposed to dodge the first laser of this attack. Maybe it actually is just busted right now, but I still think it's an insanely cool move. So all in all, while Metter doesn't offer the most engaging gameplay of the DLC, she's still a memorable boss with a great design. Plus, sticking your sword into the center of that fingerprint face is unrivaled in satisfaction. Number 8, Ramana, Saint of the Bud. First of all, I have to mention how cool of a title that is. Saint of the Bud goes so hard. I spent a lot of time going back and forth between this boss and Metter. I definitely think Metter is cooler, but in the end, I decided to give the edge to Ramana's superior moveset. She has so many awesome attacks that I love dodging. There's the super well telegraphed one where she jumps into the air, followed by a piercing slam. The one where she rolls around, followed by a melee attack, feels hella slick. And her spinning through the air 3 times, followed by butterfly explosions in phase 2 is great, and feels reminiscent of my favorite attack from Malekith. In general, I really like the butterfly explosions. They're often used in a way that doesn't feel too overwhelming and just forces you to be mindful of where you're standing. Except for the phase 2 transition, that part actually feels kinda bullshit. Overall, I think her moves are pretty consistent and do a good job of keeping you on edge while also not feeling too over the top. The main move that I still feel a little iffy on, aside from the phase transition, is this one where she spins around. Sometimes I've avoided it by dodging once, other times twice, and I don't feel very confident that I can avoid it when she pulls it out. I definitely think this is one of the main fights where even after my 2 playthroughs, I've got a fair amount more to learn, but as it is, I still find it pretty enjoyable. The only thing I'm not a particular fan of is her design. Like, it is another decently commendable weird creature design, but something about it doesn't really hit in my opinion. She's basically just a pink centipede version of Quelaag, but a lot less memorable than her. Now, starting off the A tier at number 7, I have the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. Unlike Ramana, I think this boss looks awesome. When the first gameplay trailer for the DLC came out, this thing was definitely what grabbed my attention the most. Its anatomy is so weird and unsettling and even a little bit scary. I'm sure Zuli will end up making a banger video about it. Overall, when it comes to the moveset, I think this boss, alongside Rolana, makes for a great intro to the chaotic movesets of the DLC bosses. I love how almost every major boss in this expansion comes off as being insanely overwhelming and damn near impossible when you first face it, but then naturally as you start memorizing the moves, it all begins to make sense. Anyway, back to the Divine Beast, I think the moveset of this weird creature is so damn smooth once you get it down. Phase 1 works nicely as a warm-up that introduces you to its unorthodox moves like the spinning breath attack, the weird twists through the air, the big backflipping kick, and the leap followed by a ground slam. Then, once you make it past phase 1, this thing functions in one of the most unique ways of any From Software boss. It gains the ability to conjure storms of different elements, which each give it entirely new moves, along with elemental effects added onto the previous moves, which change how you have to approach them. It can choose between lightning, ice, and wind, and once it's shown off each of the elements at least once, it can spontaneously switch between them at any moment, which turns the fight into an insanely chaotic duel where you always have to be prepared for what will come next. Of course, the visuals are also amazing due to the variety of all the swapping elements, and the soundtrack is without a doubt my favorite in the entire DLC. It's such a chaotic track that fits super well in my opinion. Unfortunately, while part of me feels like this boss deserves to be even higher on the list, the main thing holding it back is the camera. Due to it being large along with moving around really fast, the camera can occasionally get stuck in some awkward positions that make learning the fight a nuisance. And also one minor issue that I know some others have experienced as well is the performance. This boss has a few moves in particular that cause the frame rate to drop super low for a second, which is unfortunate. But despite the occasional awkwardness, I think the Divine Beast is a great boss that definitely lived up to the hype. Number 6, Putrescent Knight. I feel like having this boss so high on the list will probably be my biggest hot take of the video, since I've barely seen anyone else talking fondly about it, but I think it's severely underrated. It feels to me like the corrupted monk of Elden Ring, where the moves don't go as crazy as some others, but it has such a fluid, almost dance-like flow to it that I can't get enough of. There are so many attacks that seamlessly transition from one to the other, like when he does the boomerang throw, and after catching it, immediately follows up with a melee swing. I honestly just really like all of the attacks. They kind of feel similar to Mohg's moves, where instead of occasionally pulling out delayed attacks, they're just all delayed, which gives this duel a really consistent feel throughout. Some that I'm a particular fan of would be the one where he jumps off the horse and they take turns charging at you, which ends with a big opening for you to hit him. This one where he shoots out the fire waves, which you have to jump over. The other fire wave attack where he makes a ring of it that closes in on you, and the boomerang throws, which feel nice and slick to dodge. I also think the design is great. I love how he's like a weirdly thick skeleton with a goofy ass little head hanging off of the even goofier neck, and the horse is fittingly weird enough to go along with it. The arena you fight him in also looks awesome. It sort of reminds me of Dark Eater Midir's arena, how it's like this purple chasm that you have to make an unrealistically long drop in order to find. I also really enjoy the music. It has a nice contrast to the majority of boss themes, which usually try to go for a grand, epic vibe, whereas this one just feels really calming and chill. So I'm open to the idea that I may be giving this guy a little too much credit, but I can't help what I enjoy. And for me, the combination of the smooth and satisfying moveset, along with the unique design and cool arena, makes for a fight that I just have a lot of fun with. Number 5, Radahn Miquella's Consort. Okay. So this boss was easily the hardest one to place on the list, and I'm sure you can imagine why. The rumors are true. Consort Radahn is now what I would consider to be the hardest boss fight FromSoft has ever made. Harder than Orphan of Kos, Ishin, and Melania. He's the new king of their difficulty. But is that difficulty for the right reasons, or is it just an unfair, poorly made mess? From my experience, I'd say that, at least for the most part, it is pretty fair. The first phase honestly isn't anything too crazy. It mostly just consists of him using a lot of different sword swipe moves, which I think are pretty well made, aside from this one combo that comes out too quickly. But there's also some occasional gravity magic moves, as you'd expect from Radahn, which look pretty cool, as well as a blood flame strike. But then of course, we have phase 2, where we finally get to actually see Miquella in person as he joins the fight. And, boy, this phase is just the wildest, most intense thing FromSoft has ever concocted. Now all of Radahn's regular moves have holy magic attacks that go along with them, and honestly, I think these holy attacks are pretty damn fair. Most of them just come out in a way that kind of forces you to stick as close as possible to Radahn, which isn't all that bad since that's basically what you're supposed to be doing anyway. But there are also some exceptions, like the big blast of them that shoot out when he pulls his swords out of the ground, and the ones that shoot forward as he hits into the ground, both of which I think are pretty reasonable. However, there are also the attacks where he like flashes a bunch of clones of himself, and these ones I'm a little more on the fence about. Some of them are reasonable enough, but this one feels a bit over punishing if you don't instantly react. And I'm pretty sure that the only way to dodge this one, which follows the rock shower attack, is by running away, which is a bit unintuitive to learn. I'm also kind of 50-50 on this attack, since I like how it gives you a window to heal at the start of the phase, but I also think it's a bit over the top that you'll be guaranteed to take damage if you don't react within like the first second that it starts. Also, while I do think a lot of the holy attacks are fine, I gotta say that sometimes the brightness of it all is just a little overwhelming. So as of right now, it's a little hard to say exactly how I feel about this guy. I definitely wouldn't call the fight bullshit as a whole, but I think there were a few choices here and there that can sometimes make it feel just a hair too challenging. He also really messed up the pacing of my first run. Up until him, I was having a pretty damn smooth playthrough, but then I just ended up getting blocked from the ending by him for hours, and even ended up having to ditch my fit so I could light roll. Though once I did actually defeat him, the euphoria admittedly felt pretty great, and whenever he's doing the attacks that I'm better at dealing with, it can be a pretty fun time. I especially like this one combo in the second phase that feels kinda reminiscent of one of Pontiff Sullivan's combos. And lore-wise, it's a pretty significant encounter. I've generally tried not to focus on lore too much in this video, but it's a little hard to ignore here. Thanks to all the people out there who are actually good at piecing the story together, we now have a much better picture of past events that occurred with Radahn, Miquella, Melania, and Mohg, who has officially beaten the allegations. Plus, losing the fight by getting your heart stolen from Miquella is pretty epic. So in time, this fight could potentially end up making it higher, or possibly lower, but as of right now, I think it's pretty good, despite maybe going too far in some places. And who knows, maybe they'll nerf him. Number 4, R'hllana Twin Moon Knight. Getting to this boss for the first time was such an awesome feeling. I did enjoy my time with the spectacle-fueled fight against the Divine Beast, but R'hllana is like a classic From Software Knight fight. It feels like we're playing Dark Souls 3 again, where a bunch of the bosses were just cool-ass knights with cool-ass weapons. And of course, it helps that her moveset is super clean and fun. One common trend with these last remaining bosses is that they usually have a few moves that can be followed up in multiple different ways. Which is cool, because when she starts a combo, you can't always predict what will come next, and just have to wait and see what she does. Properly evading her combos and following up with an attack is so damn satisfying, especially with the backhand blades. I used them against her in my second playthrough and had a ton of fun with them. But of course, being the sister of Rennala, she comes equipped with some cool magic attacks. My favorites would be the Carian Greatsword looking one, the long combo that she does at the start of phase 2, which took me a while to learn, and of course, her double moon attack. I love how they purposefully try to throw you off with this move, since Rennala's moon just slowly tracks you before exploding, whereas these ones quickly shoot at the ground, forcing you to jump over their shockwaves. But let's not forget that she's also the Sword of Mesmer. In phase 2, she lights up both of her blades Pontiff Sullivan style. Seriously, what is it with the Pontiff references? Where one shoots her magic, and the other uses flame attacks, which look really visually pleasing, especially this one ultra combo. All in all, this fight really scratched my itch for getting an honorable knight type duel. R'hllana is cool as hell, fun to fight, and has some awesome looking attacks, while also not being over the top. Aside from the occasional sorcery spam, my only real gripe is that I kinda wish she got a cutscene. Like seriously, the Divine Beast gets a cutscene, but the Sword of Mesmer doesn't? Oh well, even without a cutscene, R'hllana is a more than welcome addition to Elden Ring's boss lineup. Number 3, Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. This dude was the most unexpectedly peak aspect of the entire DLC. First of all, that cutscene, man. Holy shit. I feel like whenever madness or Frenzied Flame related stuff happens in this game, it always feels really weird and out of pocket. And I'd say this definitely qualifies as weird and out of pocket. The build up to this fight is so unnerving. After making your way through the Abyssal Woods, one of the creepiest places in the series, you find yourself at Midra's home, where you're warned not to go poking around. Then, naturally, after poking around, you start to see and hear glimpses of Midra in his perpetual agony, until you finally reach him, beat him up, and proceed to witness one of the most hardcore boss transformations in the series. And luckily, the fight itself is also one of the smoothest and funnest encounters that this game has to offer. He's definitely not one of the hardest bosses, but it's just so clean and enjoyable. Similarly to R'hllana, he has a few attacks which can combo into multiple different moves, like the signature 3 swings, which can also end with a thrusting attack. I also love all of his floaty spin moves. They have such satisfying timing that feels great to properly dodge. His projectiles are also nice for the most part. They tend to cover a really wide range, but also seem to have very forgiving hitboxes. After a while, he begins phase 2 with a massive explosion which coats the arena in frenzied flames. One of my favorite things about this phase is his long combos where he leaves trails of flame with every single hit. This kind of forces you to dodge the way you do with Radahn's second phase, where you have to stick close to him or else you'll get caught by the flames. And of course, he also gains more ultra punishing moves like the Madness Beam and the spherical explosion he can conjure. Just to name a few other attacks, he also has the ability to throw you off by swinging with a small piece of his weapon. And there's the plunging stab attack, which feels great to dodge, but also admittedly looks really cool to get hit by. I was so close to putting this guy in S tier, and maybe after more playthroughs I'll realize that I'm actually not giving him enough credit, but I feel like I can only award S tier to the fights that really go above and beyond. So as of right now, I consider Midra to be about the best that an A tier boss can possibly be. Number 2, Baal the Dread. Boys, I think we might have a new best dragon fight in the series. Placidusax is arguably still cooler in terms of spectacle, but up until now, I've considered Dark Eater Midir to be the best in terms of actual gameplay. And a big part of why Baal works so damn well is because I feel like he's the only dragon boss since Midir that's put a huge emphasis on damaging the head. Part of why dragon fights can occasionally not be the most fun is because of the annoyance and mundanity that comes from attacking their legs and standing underneath them for long periods. But Baal has so many attacks that end with him leaving his head in a perfect position to get punished. Though of course, all of this would be for nothing if the moves weren't actually cool and fun to dodge. And thankfully, Baal probably has the most diverse and dynamic dragon moveset we've ever witnessed in these games. Phase 1 is really solid. He's got a nice and clean lightning flame breath attack, some cool wing swiping combos like this one which ends with a lightning blast, a ground slam attack, the charge that gets followed up by a tail whip, this bite attack which I personally love since it's so consistently punishable, and some more basic breath attacks to throw you off. Then once he performs his aesthetically peak transition into phase 2, this turns into what I unquestionably consider the second hardest fight of the DLC. Radahn may be a clear number 1, but I still think Baal claims second place in terms of difficulty with ease. Your windows to attack him become really scarce since a lot of his previous moves now have a delayed lightning effect which you have to avoid. And of course, he gets a bunch of new attacks, almost all of which are among the coolest in the entire game. There's the phase 2 opener where you have to outrun 10 fireballs and evade his big charge. The new ground stab move where he creates a delayed giant explosion that looks kinda similar to Placidusax's explosion. And what I consider to be his most demanding attack, where he flies through the air and shoots out 2 giant waves of lightning fire, ending with a delayed explosion on the second one. Overall, I think this boss's moveset is a masterpiece. The fact that we've gotten to the point where FromSoft can create such ridiculously challenging foes that are also completely reasonable and fun to fight is mind-boggling.
Did you just say mind-boggling?
Yeah, mind-boggling. You know, when things are so crazy, it gets your thoughts all trapped like in a bottle.
It's also an absolutely peak fight in terms of cool factor. Baal himself has such a cool-ass design, the fact that he breathes fire and lightning at the same time is amazing, and despite not even having a cutscene, I think he has a super well done build-up. First, you get to hear about him being the one responsible for ripping off one of Placidusax's heads, and then you get an atmospheric, stormy journey up the jagged peak where you find him at the summit. Also, like I said earlier, I'm usually not into summoning in these games, but I just had to witness the meme legend for myself.
Curse you, Baal! I hereby vow you will rue this day!
What a hype, dude. So, in case it isn't abundantly clear, I love this boss, and the fact that he isn't a remembrance fight is kind of an odd detail, but whatever, at least he gets Dragon Communion stuff. He would easily be my choice for the best boss in Shadow of the Erdtree, if it weren't for a certain snake-infested badass. Number 1, Mesmer the Impaler. I'm honestly shocked that Mesmer actually turned out to be my favorite. Considering how he was the main focus of the trailers, I figured he would be like the decoy distracting us from the real number 1. And while he definitely isn't the peak in terms of difficulty, when it comes to quality, I think he really is the best. But before discussing the moveset, I just want to talk about how cool he is. I love the super edgy build up to him. After making your way through one of the most complex areas in the series and finding yourself in his dark chamber, we get a cool and creepy introduction where he seems a little indifferent about your presence. And then he starts things off with a super aesthetically pleasing explosion. Honestly, all of his fiery moves in general are such a feast for the eyes. I love the darker look of them compared to regular flames, and I just think they go really hard. When it comes to his moves, he's one of the absolute best at what I talked about earlier with Rolana, where he can follow up certain attacks in multiple different ways. With the biggest example being this move right here, where he coats his spear with flames. He can follow it up by just spinning, stabbing then spinning, spinning then dragging it before thrusting, and in phase 2, he always does his weird twisty charge right afterward. I also love pretty much all of his other moves. He's got this poke followed by the delayed dragging thrust, the one where he dashes through the air while twirling, this super stylish combo which can be followed up with a jump and a ground slam, as well as my new single favorite move to dodge in all of Elden Ring. Damn, that shit goes hard, and I'm so glad that they chose this to be the skill you get when using his spear. Then once we get to his awesome phase transition, he accepts that he needs to get serious, abandoning what Marika gave him and embracing the abyssal serpent within, unlocking some new snake attacks. I've heard some people arguing against the hitboxes of these attacks, but I think as long as you time your iframes correctly, they're perfectly reasonable, except for maybe the way this one bites upward at the end of this combo. But all in all, they have a surprising amount of variety. Sometimes he'll quickly turn into one, or just summon one for a single attack. But he can also do some triple combos with them, and there's also the ultimate one where he summons a bunch at once, which can either be followed up with his opener, or the final hit from my favorite combo. Similarly to Bale, this is one of those fights that I just can't help but be impressed by. It really is one of those 1 in 100 bosses where the moveset is super meticulously put together to maximize the perfect balance of being fun, while also difficult, fair, and rewarding. Plus, it obviously helps that he's got enough cool factor to live up to the high standard of his moveset, which is enough to make him my favorite boss in Shadow of the Erdtree. But of course, that's just my opinion, so please feel free to tell me about your favorite bosses in the comments. As you guys can probably tell, I'm really satisfied with how the boss quality of this DLC turned out. I only think that 2 of them were worthy of S tier, but even so, it's just such a consistent overall package. Aside from the Letta fight, which sort of isn't really a boss, I think that even the worst main fight is still a solid B tier. Plus, Letta's fight is cool anyway, as long as you summon for it. The quality of these main fights is honestly my favorite aspect of the DLC, partially because they fixed one of my main issues with the game as a whole, being that I thought it didn't have enough main fights, but now it definitely does. I'm not 100% sure what my next videos will be, but they're obviously going to be related to this expansion since there's so much to talk about. Maybe some stuff about new weapons, since a lot of them are so cool and fun. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Until next time.